Hello, hello, people, hello, everyone. We are here at the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas. Why aren't you? That's question number one. For those of you who couldn't be here, didn't know this was happening, here we are. This is the last session in the Global 16 Days campaign against gender-based violence. Last one in a long haul of events. And I'm really excited that we are here with Gaynel Curry, who is a very expert, that's done lots and lots of work, lots and lots of places from the United Nations to the University of The Bahamas for faculty of law now, and on the United Nations Permanent Forum on People of African Descent. And we're going to talk about reclaiming culture of human rights. Reclaiming has been the word that we've been using throughout this campaign because it has been terrible. Lots of bad things have happened. We've lost lots of things. A lot of our work, our language is being co-opted, being misused, abused, and it can feel like it's just a losing battle every single day. And we really need to think about how we could frame this, how we could address this without framing it in a negative way and being very defeatist. And reclaiming seemed to be a way that we could do that. Taking back what's ours, reclaiming ownership of what we've created, of the work we've done, and doubling and tripling down on human rights and on women's rights, and LGBT rights, people's rights, and migrant rights, and affirming that these rights are inherent, they're inalienable, and interdependent. We need them all to be able to access any of them and use them and fully enjoy our human rights. The thing about human rights, though, that I found when we talk about them is that it gets people's backs up. Yep. People really feel like it's a foreign agenda. It's something that is being imposed on us. It's something that's not known to the Bahamas. It's not something that Bahamians have ever known, used, needed, talked about, nothing. But history, contemporary history in particular, will tell us something different. There was a time that human rights were being used very actively by activists, people who don't necessarily wouldn't have considered themselves activists, but used to get us where we are today, to a place where we can enjoy certain necessities and conveniences that we might not even recognize as rights because they're so integral to our daily lives. They're so ordinary. And in thinking about reclaiming human rights, I'm thinking about how we can go back to that, how we can think about and maybe reframe for people some of these moments in history and how we've used it and make it feel more us, more like they belong to us, and it's something that we can use for ourselves. Yeah.
Just to say hello, everyone. Great to be here. I think it's a wonderful topic. Always, I love to speak about human rights, and I fully believe that we can never, we should never, we ought never, super weary in fighting the fight for all human rights for all human beings. Human rights are not foreign to us. Indeed, they're not foreign to us. And there's this section that, oh, this is a European thing, this is not a Bahamian thing, it's very much a Bahamian thing, it's a Caribbean thing, it's a foreign thing, it's a us thing, right? So when you hear of the women's suffrage movement, how would you say it's not about rights? Well, rights are women. When you hear about the Burma riots, when you hear about the strikes, the 50s and 60s and so forth, it was about equal pay, equal opportunity. It was not all of that. Fight for independence was about equality between the races in the country, right? Blacks, white. So to say that maybe the language wasn't the same necessarily in that language, although I think oftentimes it was. Oftentimes it was. They were talking about rights. Doris Johnson, for example, mentioned rights, talked about going to the United Nations and why it is important for us to do that. When we were talking about our independence, we talked about rights. and the rights outlined in the Charter, UN Charter. These issues around self-determination of people, those are our rights. So to say that, these are foreign to us is not at all true. And it's just, totally a misrepresentation of truth. I think we've kind of lost our way in the rights struggle, so to speak, because, and I'm going to enter down this other path slightly, I won't get pulled down that I would be too far, because it became more about politics and politics. And so I think at the onset it was about people fighting for their rights. I think the rise of political parties, which is a fantastic thing, and it has its place. But I think it sort of moved certain agendas behind political party lines. So it didn't have that outright appearance, if you will, of a fight for right, but more of a point of view. I don't know if that makes sense. So that's how I see, for example, the women's rights movement. I always say that. I believe, and I'm going to say this probably at the risk of being challenged, but please do challenge me, anyone in the room. I believe that the women's suffrage movement got stalled because of politics in some sense. Because a lot of it happened in spite of politics. For all women from really different group journey. But after, once you got that right to vote, shortly thereafter, and you get into party politics and the emergence of different political parties, you see the women's movement going with becoming certain parliaments. That's my view. So the focus is on I support my political party to a certain extent, and less about equality in the discussions in Bahamas. So you have, for example, two fields of one put forward by the FNM, one put forward by the PLP, and it's like, that's an FNM thing, but that's a PLP. This is the rights thing. And women should have their rights equal to men in our society. So it's not the PLP or FNM or whichever party that emerges, it's about rights of human beings. And so, as a citizen of the country, I believe that constitutionally I should have the rights of all citizens, right? And not because I have to be a woman or you have to be married anymore. But that's how I think things sort of like veer off into different status. The space I've been away from the country for a while. I will admit that to everyone. You know that about me, but I've always kept too much. But it's very political, honest. So to have the human rights movement is a challenge, because a lot of what you say or do is somehow, are you speaking to the political thing, or is this who you supporting, who you speaking for? Speaking human rights for everyone. And so that's where I see a bit of a challenge, and I see as we grow a kind of a challenge. People may disagree and say those referenda were about other things. They may mention religion, all sorts of other things, but I believe the politics have a lot to do with it as well. And so we have to be, as I said, intentional about moving the human rights agenda forward. Any way where you have inequalities in the society, you need to be moving forward in that direction to ensure that all people enjoy their rights. And that's the challenge as I see it. The movement here for human rights is seen as something external also, I think, because Bahamians tend to think, I don't want to make sweeping generalizations, tend to think, we don't really have any human rights concerns. We don't have big human rights concerns, right? And back in the day when I drafted for the UN, oftentimes I would hear that, oh, those Caribbean countries, you don't have big human rights concerns. Well, obviously, don't have a concern. We know you guys are tourists and that kind of thing. Everything's perfect here. And then we also sell that. So when we have to write our reports, we're hesitant to identify what key issues for us. And we can't truly get the kind of support, and kind of a movement toward change if we ourselves are not recognizing that there is a challenge, right? So to say that I work on racial discrimination right now, people will say to me, there's no racism in the Bahamas. We've gone past that. And it depends on then how you define it. So there are many issues that still sort of lean in that direction of racism or inequality between the races, or even colorism, right? Whether you're light skin or dark skin, even issues around how you wear your hair, long hair, short hair, if you cover or you don't, your hair. All those kinds of things I think have to do with race, culture, and so on and so on, that we don't want to see as racist or as a form of discrimination. But I'd like to have a conversation and not have a monologue. So let's start it. Any disagreement in the room? I want disagreement.
Not even find myself. Yeah, no, it's interesting. You mentioned the politicization of human rights and the human rights conversation. I don't think that's split along party lines. I think political parties are pretty consistent in their non-pro-human rights stances. I'm not talking about 30 years ago, 20 years ago, and we see that with respect to women's human rights and the outcome of that. As far as the vote and women, getting the right to vote, when you conceptualize political participation or civic engagement as ending with the vote, then you think that you've arrived.
Exactly.
And that's that. Also, if you fit the broader political narrative of what it means to be a Bahamian, you're less affected by rights violations. And so you're going to think, oh, well, I have the freedom to do this. But it's also the freedom from violence, the freedom from a lot of other things where rights are being affected. We don't frame those issues in terms of human rights. I think it's become so embedded in the culture that it's like, all right, this is an issue. We have a problem, but it's not necessarily a human rights issue. The term human rights has become something that is external, and it's not something that we've internalized. At the political level, we've not done it yet really at the University of The Bahamas and other key institutions. And I think if we're talking about institutions of socialization, in addition to schools, religious institutions, a lot of other institutions need to be a little bit differently. But if you have folks who have this position against it, who are influential, where do you really are?
I completely agree with that. I completely agree with John.
My thought, even in listening to you, is we're very reactive, right? We don't give attention to things as they're being presented until the point. And so I find that even when you're talking like that's actually really true, because if you have a human rights agenda and you start out under one regime, when the next one does that conform to that? Does we not want to take on a program? And it makes you question the importance of the right of women in the first place, right? People lose their way in their party, but then I just find that we're just a little bit too reactive, where we wait until it does become an issue, right? So COVID, good evening. COVID definitely highlighted the amount of gender-based violence that's happening in homes, because we, even as psychologists, saw way more reports, people coming in and talking about what's been going on, and so it's like, what's been happening? This is why we're fighting for their rights, because this has been a thing. But it's only when it becomes such a thing that we react and respond in a way that can. I tell you, they try to create change that don't happen. It's on paper, you want to make a change, but in that, not now, that's a generalization, but then is it seen fully? Is it seen fully? It'll start, it'll work for like a couple years and then it'll drop. And there's no research around why it drops, why this happened, right? So, you know, I find that our country just, it needs to shift from, you know, I'm tired of being reactive, because I keep you as if we only can talk about it when it's a huge problem. It's not, that makes sense.
Not even only when it's a huge problem. I remember the first, so marital rape, when you have that bill in 2017, it was because the special rapporteur said something.
Yeah.
And then that disappeared. We
Yeah.
had a human rights commission that was established a few weeks before their appearance for UPR. And where is that now? I think they have the numbers
Yeah.
and the areas that
Love
they're,
it.
the exact areas that they're going to focus on. But I mean, again, to your point about being reactionary and just having these things that look good on paper. Who's advising that committee? What is the track record of those parliamentarians who are sitting on that committee, with the exception of Aricia, who is around these issues?
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot needs to be linked to education. I think not enough is linked to education. You alluded to it, and I think you said it in the excuse me. And when you talk about the research, to me, that needs to be more of a focus. I know that my colleagues at the university are doing something to do a lot more of that, and some of them have always been writing, to be fair, on these types of issues, social justice issues, and so on in the history of the country. But the university has not, in my view, been publishing nearly as much as it ought to in terms, and in order to be, I think, proactive on some of these issues require you to step back and do the research.
Yeah.
And to really dig a little bit deeper, you know, and the sort of reactive behaviors, because we have shallow conversations. We don't go deep.
Yes.
And we have. I'm happy that we are speaking, and we have our dear friend Eric just walked into the room. We're happy that these conversations are happening on the radio. But I think a lot more needs to go deeper, and that's for the university to do. And as we speak about whether we in the what are we doing at the university? I know we are. I've been there for just over a year now, and I'm trying to get started in the human rights course. We had it before. It wasn't on the agenda again. Now I'll put it back on the agenda. I'm trying to see how we can look at human rights in Caribbean as one course, international human rights law as another course. What does that mean? And to try to encourage students to want to do it, and to try to ensure that we have human rights, and it happens to a certain extent in most of the social science courses, right? So you have it in history to a certain extent. You have it in psychology and sociology to a certain extent. But this sort of deep look into it is not happening in the way that I think it needs to be. I was just talking earlier when we said that. I mean, I wanted to understand a little bit about where we can find information on violence against women back in the day, right? Who recorded that? Where was that recorded? How can can we publish that so we have a regular and consistent discussion around that, so that we're not speaking about this is something that's only of today, right? So I know this work is happening in silos and in bits and bobs around the country, but there needs to be a coming together. One of the things I had suggested many years ago, is a Human Rights Institute. And I think that will help us to engage a little bit more seriously about these issues. We have tons and tons and tons of recommendations coming from the international community, CEDAW, the UPR, Universal Periodic Review of Human Activism. So the Convention on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, the Universal Periodic Review, the Committee on Elimination of Racial Discrimination. All these committees have given us tons of recommendations, the Inter-American System as well, and also us. We are the Gender-Based Violence Task Force a couple of years ago. They did a really good job. Came up with some really good recommendations with that. I don't know, maybe they're being implemented now. I shouldn't speak because I'm out of the loop. But there are also some very good recommendations. And so we don't have a shortage of good ideas. We have some sort of challenge to move it forward. And that could be, I think, a lot of times, it is around politics and whose idea it was, and whose idea it wasn't, and so forth and so on. But there needs to be a way to ensure that there's to be more. And that has to, I think the university is a good place to do that. We expect intellectual thinking on the issues. We expect discussions and disagreements on the issues in that space, right? And we expect the space to be non-political. And so we can be intellectual about it and have real discussions and do the research on it. So I think the university is an excellent space to have that human rights institute, to have that conversation around what do we want to see, what does it mean to us, where do we go from here in terms of advancing that culture of rights and, as you put it, reclaiming human rights for us in Bahamas. Sorry, go ahead.
So yeah, I think a critical mass has to be achieved, right? Like, how do we create critical mass? Well, certainly there are so many elements in the environment that are operating in silos, more like floating, right? Less like a silo, but more like just things floating around, bumping into each other. Gaining critical mass is the most important thing. To gain critical mass, though, you then have to interrogate and then construct a couple of things. First is the political class and political culture. Not that they have a prevailing message or an agenda, but at this point, nothing that's important to them will breathe life. Nothing will see air, nothing will see light, breathe air, none of that, right? But deeper than that is a cultural issue where people don't believe in human rights. And I don't mind any of the fancy, intellectual, academic language they engage in. They don't believe in human rights as they've been constructed, right? They believe that human rights are the rights that God gave you. That's it, right? I don't want to sound diminishing or degrading, but we have a whole lot of people that talk and just use words, don't really understand what it is they're saying. I know we're recording this, I can say it again. I get in trouble every time I say it in school. Toastmasters is the devil. And substance, form over substance, fashion, right, style over substance has created a culture where people say a whole bunch of stuff and it means nothing. And it means nothing to them. And just a quick example, the who would have syndrome, we would have syndrome, right? A lawyer is patient zero. Supposed to be the best performing lawyer is patient zero. And we had the deputy director of education making a public statement about we would have gone on a walkabout to look for students, and we would have found 12 students. They found the 12 students, they went on the walkabout. It didn't rain, nothing prevented them from going on the walkabout, but they just adopt this language. And that's what they've done with this human rights language, right? It is just empty. They don't believe it. And we've reached a position now which is critical because we have people in key and critical positions in this framework, in this landscape, that don't believe. But because they've been positioned in such a way, they are now entrenched in their personal belief, right? That is the cultural thing, that it can only exist in the public service because the public service thinks it can be neutral on matters like this, right? Because they refuse to do what they ought to do, which is to say, listen, you have a personal life, you have a public professional life, you have personal beliefs, and you have professional standards you have to perform to and make the distinction, right? And so it's not just that you have people who don't believe, but you've put these people in key positions, right? And they cannot. Some of them are good-hearted people. They cannot do the work. And so that's sort of the way that the political culture exacerbates, right? An existing culture, a misunderstanding of human rights.
Yeah.
then even in our experience in spaces where we, even if we don't understand it, we participated in it, right? So I make a point about the labor union movement and the political culture and how union seemed to be a pipeline, right? A union to parliament pipeline. There are actors in the space who said on air publicly, right? Like, no, you don't get it. The relationship between union and parliament is inextricable, right? And so you can't talk about human rights and the labor movement and have the conversation that we're trying to have because they're not grounded or rooted in the same way. They don't see it as a human rights movement in the same way that we see it as a human rights movement, right?
And that's so important. And actually, I've met several of the, well, back in the day, not current, I have to say, but back in the day, several of the leaders of the labor movement here in the Bahamas when I was in Geneva, attending the International Labour Organization conference, annual conference and so forth. So just, a lot of what has been coming out of the ILO is human rights issues. They talk about human rights in the context of work. And so to not see them not see it in the context of human rights is really challenging for me. It's almost like a deliberate effort not to. If you don't do that.
It should be a natural evolution, may not be the right word. The most potent and powerful space, as Equality Bahamas delved into ILO work, human rights in the workplace, and expanding that. And when I speak to one or two individual actors, right? They understand how powerful that space is, but they are unwilling to do the work to not even translate, but to bring that into common life and common work in the Bahamas.
And I think one of the challenges with this, and I will definitely agree on is that I think we need to somehow, if we can, separate a little bit these issues from the government. Because a lot of it to me is they expect the government to lead it, like the gender issues. A lot back in the day, a lot was awareness the department or the bureau going to do something on gender equality, or what are you guys doing for the 16 days, or what do you do? So waiting for the government to lead it, it's not going to be very possible. I can guarantee you that. I commend Lisa Wallace for the excellent work that she's done on her own way back when I first came back. And Lisa said, "We have to meet Lucia." I said, "Okay, let's speak up." But then she was probably one of the few people, and still remain one of the few people in the space working on the issue consistently, despite whatever comes. She is determined to work on those issues, and you need to have that kind of passion and commitment, which is not to have a different body because you're attacked all the time. Well, and so, and how to do that, right? So even in any space where you go to speak about human rights, you can expect pushback. And if we're waiting on governments to lead these processes, it's not going to happen the way we want to, because we know that governments will always, and I'm not talking about any particular government, not this one or any other one here at the Bahamas, but governments generally around the world as well. And I've worked around the world a lot, so I can say that they will always go the gentle route so as to keep things, not to upset the apple cart too much, right? So we're going to say a few things and have some nice language and write a few nice reports and say some good things in the UP, University of Periodic Review in New York when we go there, or to the Human Rights, to the General Assembly when we go there. Those are nice to have, but that's not the essence of the movement. We need to build a movement there that will take the human rights agenda to the next level. And I think, and I take your point about critical mass. One of the things I really treasure about being in UB, and I should probably say it, it's because you get a chance to interact with bright young minds. And I know that UB has its challenges, and we're working on those. But one of the things you get to do with those young people is to speak about those issues. When they enter my class at the beginning of the semester, I'm like, I throw out these kinds of questions, right? And, around gender equality. Oh, no. And God made men to be the leader and women have to submit. And this is the things coming from 19 and 21-year-olds. You say young people, right? And when we speak about issues about migrant workers, when you think about the Haitian community, when you speak about, and it's this opposition to anything to do with rights, right? When you think about LGBTQI, this is opposition to it. At the end of that semester, every single semester, it is my goal to convince at least one person to think a little bit differently, to open your mind and to think differently about something. I'm not trying to brainwash anyone or anything like that, but just to open your mind and think a little bit and to ask questions. Ask questions. Why is it this way? And when you ask those questions, I think you begin to somehow question the reality around you, the situation around you. And so I asked at the beginning of my political government politics class the other day, how many of them, which I think, were within their rights, they had their thoughts and they why on vote. They didn't see any hope, any reason to vote. It was 160. That's what they said to me. Not my views, this is what they said. So we had, over the course of the semester, some opportunities for them to see things differently. Like, rights, are their rights the same as men? Do you think there's a difference? And so you push them and those kinds of questions. Should the Bahamas become a republic? If so, why? And then if not, why not? These are the kinds of questions we're asking the students to think about. And yes, we have a long way to go because these aren't the kinds of provocative questions that they always get. But I see, when you speak about the history, for example, history of Haiti, they understand a little bit more. When I speak about issues around reparations, that's a long time ago. Not that long ago, the British just finished paying their slave masters in 2015. So it ain't that long ago. They were ready to collect money up until 2015. Why can't we speak about getting something for whatever that means in terms of reparations? Let's have a discussion. What should that mean? What would that mean for us here in the country? So I think, it's an opportunity, really, it's a good fertile ground for us to begin having those conversations. And many times, I can tell you the truth, you walk out of your class again this semester and they still, Miss Curry is something else now, but they ain't change it. Oh, I hear you, Miss Curry, but they ain't change it. But many of them do start to think, and they do come to me after and say, I hear what you say about that. I didn't realize that about the Haitian Revolution. I didn't realize the Haitians went through that. I didn't know about the indemnity that they had to pay France and how they got to be in the situation that they're in. I spoke about that to them, and they are now seeing things differently, right? Understanding what the challenge has been in that country. But just to say that I think UB is a good place to have that conversation. I still believe it's a place where we can introduce something like a Human Rights Institute, but let me hear your thoughts.
Well, I was going to say, it can be the government.
It can.
It can.
Okay.
Even though technically they're obligated to implement an NHRI, National Human Rights Institute.
That's the obligation, but
also they're pretending that this parliamentary committee, right? Like I would be shocked if it goes beyond the parliamentary committee, but the intent is for the parliamentary committee to construct an NHRI. The conversation should take place at Maynard Gibson's comments last year approaching the LGBT talk, pride talk, right? Like telling them that y'all don't know what an institutional learning is for. You should come. That's what it's for, right? Like, still, it should be. Is it quite yet?
no, not yet. It should be. It's getting there.
Yeah, it should be. To the point, it must be because government can't do the work. Yes, they must have an NHRI. Yes, they're obligated to do some things. But like you say, like you pointed out in some ways leading up to this point, right? You get a prod, they prod, they look at the UN. Can I suggest that we commit to a time to consider committing to making a decision, right? Like that. NGOs, civil society have to help government do the work. Like this is the part where you gotta pretend like you're friends and you're helping them, right? You are making it easy for them to have the conversation by forcing it, by introducing it. They don't want to, they're not going to, unless some foreigner comes, right? And then we're going to have a beautiful 7 minutes of, can't you see we're committed to this? So civil society has to do the work and do it in a way that makes it easy for the government to do
Sure,
as
because
well, right?
that is the role of civil society, to push government to do it.
And-
Now, they're not going to just automatically do nowhere in the world. They're going to
That's-
unless they're forced.
That's the reality. Maynard Gibson did us another solid, but I know only like 7 people heard it. It was almost 15 years ago. Human rights, right? Human rights focused statement. Some foreigner will go, you have any human rights abuses in the country? And Maynard Gibson said, we don't have any documented cases of human rights abuses in the country. She said it with a smile, right? Like she said it with a smile, like, blah, blah. We don't have any documented cases of human rights abuses in the country. And then I followed up in a public statement to say, yeah, well, if you don't have any mechanisms to formally document human rights abuses, then you can say you don't have any human rights abuses. I walked to private, not privately, but I walked somewhere afterwards and I say, hey, address that. And she said, well, look here, thank you, because that was the point. She was like, I was hoping that somebody would get up and say, well, we would need a mechanism to be able to document and for you to answer in affirmative. And so I said that, the actual answer is we just don't have any documented cases.
Yeah.
I was trying to tell her that's what to say next time.
Really?
But the point was, she said she's trying to also respond the way she should politically, but create space for somebody to come in and say, so when you will create the mechanism to do this work, that's your obligation, right?
Yeah.
And so we have to be savvy in the same way and play them like Haiti did in the revolution. Play them against each other.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I fully believe in the Human Rights Institute. I really fully believe in that. That will go a long way in getting us to do some of that thinking about it, some of the getting of information around it, some of the education and awareness around it, going a little bit deeper.
The second point I want to make just quickly before we move on from that is that one of the unfortunate things we're plagued with here is women's rights, gender rights became sexy again when Kagame came down. Ugandan was the chair of the Commonwealth Women Parliamentarians Committee. And they started talking about quotas in elections for women. And I can't remember this exact language, but quotas. How do we get more women into politics?
Temporary special measures.
So
Trying to introduce.
what I've seen happening, and Kagame is kind of like a timeline, but the conversation definitely happened then, is that there are women in the women's rights movement. There are women, there are lots of women with influence, and they could afford a lot of girls too, right? But they only seem to be organizing around issues that deal with women in political life and women in public life, but they read public life as business and politics, right? And so they're not going to push the limit. They're not going to be pushing the edge forward because their whole presence, and I mean, of course I'm saying this boldly like I live in people's hearts, right? But they want proximity to the political class. They're not going to challenge it.
Yeah. And I mean, we have to think about that. So definitely I would say one of the ways is to sort of reclaim is to have the avenues to be able to do that. And that was through, like I said, the institutes are the only way. NGOs, I think, are really crucial. The NGO life, I'm sure people tell us, it's not an easy life, right? It's not an easy life in terms of the funding that you get, and since recent years, that funding has become even more challenging, even globally. So we know that it's tough sometimes to work on these issues because you're not going to get a lot of support, and you're going to get a lot of criticism, and you have to really hustle and be committed to doing this and rely on family members and good friends, to support you on these issues. But I think that's a really important thing. Civil society needs to be stronger. I do believe that. I'm not trying to discredit national mechanisms for human rights. I'm not trying to discredit them or the national gender mechanisms or any of that. I think those have their place, but they aren't going to necessarily be the ones that are going to be visionary in terms of taking us to the next level of where we want to go in terms of the whole human rights agenda in the country. It's going to take persons who have a little bit more freedom to think outside of the box, to think and speak freely outside of the political reins and so forth and so on. So I think that's really important. Another issue for me is around language. And I had a challenge with language even while I was in the UN. And I have to say that when I think about racial discrimination, I didn't like the phraseology, DEI, discrimination, equality, and
Diversity,
diversity, or whatever. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. And not that I don't believe those parts are important, but my challenge with my colleagues back in the UN at the time is that when you go in that direction of calling things something else, you miss the essence of the fact that we talk about human rights. And so we have already, as states all around the world, agreed to the human rights language. Let's call it what it is. And if we're speaking about racial discrimination, let's call it that. Discrimination based on race. And if we're talking about discrimination based on sex, let's say discrimination based on sex. Because then you say DEI, see, I got the acronym all mixed up the other minute. This a few minutes ago. And that's reality. People just say, okay, this is acronym we can hide behind, and we don't really have to do anything to move the needle on the situation of people of African descent in the UN system. Because they can hide behind the fact that, yes, we have DEI and we're moving forward certain people and we have equality and they're talking gender equality, except I say, I look around, you are moving women up the ladder, they just don't look like me.
Turns out that white women were the biggest benefactors.
So talk about DEI, who are you speaking about? Right? But the whole world thinks we're talking about racism. We're dealing with racism. I believe language is crucial and we need to call things what they are, because then again, now it turns out, you say that, white women may have gained much in the DEI movement, as short-lived as it was, but who were penalized most? Black women are the ones who are being fired, even though many of them had nothing to do with DEI. In terms of being brought in under that in many institutions around the world. Those are the ones that are going to be pushed out very quickly. So when you use language that nobody knows and understands, they hide behind that language to do whatever they think that it is they think they can do. I fought against that vehemently, I can tell you. And nobody was hearing. Right? This is the language that we think we can get past the powers that be. They will like this language because it's not confrontational. Race is too confrontational, And here we are back at square one, right? So I think that that's a big issue here as well when we speak about language, and everything is LGBTQI. They don't know what it is. They don't care to know what it is. If you're speaking about women's rights or LGBTQI rights or anything, when you mention the word human rights, that's LGBTQI. That's all they think about. They think about nothing else. You're speaking about gay people and same-sex marriage, and then that's where they go down that rabbit hole. And that's a part of the agenda, but that's not the entire agenda. And so we have to keep things in perspective, and we have to know the language and use the language and call discrimination or use the words that we know to be the real words and call it that. Because other than that, we fall into a trap of going down a rabbit hole and nobody knows what you're talking about. Any thoughts around language?
Actually, the question. My question is around what do you think is preventing that move to use the language? Is it fear? Is it status? law space? Like, what is the root of that removal from using the correct language? You think?
I think it's all of the above you mentioned. I think there's a part of wanting, Erin mentioned it as well, wanting to be in the in crowd, wanting to be a part of the, the not wanting to go against the grain, but wanting to oppose. And so, that language is something that will get you in trouble, right? And so will cause you not to get a contract. Will cause you not to, not to be favored, or will cause you to fall out of favor, right? These things, and so I think it is fair. A part of it is fair. A big part of it is ignorant, not understanding language. Not ignorance that then people are not well educated. That's what I'm talking about. I mean, a lack of knowledge of the issues, and so taking the time to learn the issues and to understand the difference in nuances of the whole movement, right? And what are the human rights concerns that we have? I said we have a million recommendations out there already on the Bahamas. Sit a minute and look at them. What did they say? What did they speak about? They don't only speak about one issue. So lack of knowledge, right? And a fear of what it means. And I think the global agenda is also leaning in that direction, right? A part of it is religion as well. And that takes us sort of those issues when we speak about, human rights, we talk about gay rights. And so that, that's anti-religion. So all those issues is intertwined. It's not one thing, and it's multi-layered, multi-tiered, and it has to be addressed that way.
It's also incrementalism, right? The sort of accepting that we don't look at the big picture anymore. We just want to move this one thing through, and to get it through, we need to not say gender.
Yeah.
We need to just say women and men.
Exactly.
To make sure we're not including anybody of any other gender or suggesting anything about gender that's different from sex. And you see it at this level, where you might want to try to get a grant. And if you put gender in there, it's not happening. You put women and men, maybe something might happen. But it also happens at the multilateral level. So when you see at United Nations General Assembly, at Commission on the Status of Women, when they're working on outcome documents and trying to get all member states to sign off on something, you have to find language that's going to make Jamaica happy. That's going to make
Russia
and great states. They have different takes on these issues, and this document will be stuck because two states don't like the phrase, and this happened a couple of times in the last few years, don't like the phrase moving in all their diversity. Because then that means all women. And that means including queer women.
Yeah.
So we don't want to use that language, and they will spend hours
Days.
arguing over this little segment.
Look
Of this document.
Look at the gender equality referendum and the addendum or the addition proviso for rule number 4, where they sought to define sex as male or female only, right? When really the language they were supposed to use is biological assignment. They're trying to make a distinction between sexual orientation and sex, right? And so they were supposed to say biological assignment because we let the doctors define medical terms, right? And so the doctor will tell you what a baby is, it's a boy or a girl or whatever, not the Constitution. But that is all fighting over words, right? Like if you use sex, then you would say same-sex marriage and sexual orientation. So just can't just use sex. But it should have been, if you had to define sex, it should have been biological assignment as opposed to male or female. I can't imagine what the conversations were like in those rooms, right? And then negotiate on the why and the what in their life, which is going to be. But that's a modern example. In Jamaica, they define it as male and female only, right? And it wasn't constitutional, but I think it was in sexual offenses, the legislation. They went straight to it. We ain't opening it up to no interpretation.
Yeah.
Sex means male and female, that's it.
Yeah. And that's a part of this issue around language. And the challenges internationally get quite significant as well, and the negotiations get tough. And I think twice we've had not been able to agree an outcome document as the Commission on Status of Women is around the issue of violence against women and issues around gender equality. Right? So you can get agreement on anything else, women in work, women in education, women in health. You just can't really get an agreement on all of those issues because states do not agree on those issues. And that's where we are. And I've been in many negotiating rooms and they are the same thing. And the challenge, the pushback on the language is there. It's real, it's global, and it's regional, and of course here with us nationally. So language is a big part of that as well.
I must say, I'm going to go home and make a zine now. I just remember the Prime Minister called rape is rape, right? But he didn't mean rape is rape. He meant rape or not, right? That ain't rape. But constant cry, actually, you are hearing in the spaces, why do you have to call it rape? Right? That was the argument, like why we can't just use this with aggravated spousal assault. So why you can't use that? Why you have to call it? It's important that you call it rape. I keep asking them why you had to change statutory rape to unlawful sexual intercourse. Now we have fools around the place. I got to zoom for this too. Saying, I didn't know it was going to be so much trouble to get my girlfriend's daughter pregnant. Right? Because somebody told you that it ain't even important enough to call it rape anymore. We could just call it unlawful sexual intercourse.
Down the language, and that's the point. You've watered down the language on these very important issues, right? And so we see that. At least you want to add something.
No. Let's finish that. I want to circle back to UB.
Okay. Yeah, and so the issue around language, you had somebody want to follow up on that.
Yeah, I had a question. Sorry, it was just so questions because I'm just like, okay, so then if the people's attitudes are one of ignorance, how do we reclaim? Because ignorance is very difficult to change. So
big mindsets are difficult to change, and that's why these issues are so tough. Because we're talking of human rights, as you said in the beginning, these are very much, integral to people's lives, and it's like speaking about their religion and speaking about what they believe and what they've been taught since they were in cradle. And so to change that perception is very difficult. Nobody's suggesting that it isn't. And that's why incrementally, yes, that's an approach, but I think that it has to be tackled on various levels. In the educational realm, and when we were at the Department of Gender, we tried to introduce some discussions with, students. I will say that I think the first one we did with high school students, we got a lot of backlash. Why are you talking about sex? Why are you talking about gender? Why are you talking about these things with these students? But we did a session where we had the lines open for 2 hours, I think it was, for students to indicate or describe their first harassment. And these students, might be over 100 of them from different high schools, grades 10 to 12, described everything right to rape. That's all not rape, And so this is we had already said up front what the scenario would be. We will use these. We won't publish them. You'll be anonymous. No one, you won't be named or anything like that. But and the reason why we wanted to do that is to show that there is a challenge, and we did show that at the time to the powers that be. And listen, this is an issue. These young girls and boys, many of them, are talking about rape, out rape. So it's not just somebody whistling at you and saying, "Hey, you saw it," or something like that. You look good, or something like that. It went much further, which is what we think harassment is, right? So we talked about what harassment can be. But we did further with that, and we went to Grand Bahama, where we actually met grade 7s. And they are like, I don't know, 11, 12, maybe, in grade 7. And they pretty much describe the same thing. Right? So they, and the kind of questions we were getting, and, one of the boys said, well, if I kill him, would I go to jail? So this question must have been put to him as well, or said to him at some point, right? And so, these are the kinds of things that we need to, so when we try to pretend that it doesn't exist, and we don't want to talk about this, and it's not great, and we name it something else, and try to pretend that we live in this universe that we don't live in. This is the tough place, even for 7-year-olds. The average age of those children who indicated they were being harassed was 7 or 8 years old. And so that's a challenge, because I will tell you that, they will say, oh, these little girls, they're too forward, or whatever they say, right? The reality is, who's forward at 7? At 7, you're playing with dolls and climbing trees and shooting marbles and jumping rope or whatever we did back then, right? I don't know what they do now. I think they've watched more games or stuff like that. But the reality is not, it has nothing to do with sex. In fact, rape never does have anything to do with sex. Right? Power and control and abuse, right?
However, the national security was doing, the was clear to say, yes, you can give consent. You can give consent from 7 years old. It's just the law says having sexual intercourse with somebody under 16 before without their consent, which tells you that the person can consent. It's just that in law we say it doesn't matter. I'm just saying, it's not like when people saying, oh, the 7-year-old so fast and forward.
Yeah, this is what your minister of national security then said.
I second heard that, but I
officers the same too.
Sorry?
Yeah, police officers as well.
Yes.
I mean, the first thing that they met with a lot of police officers, and well, y'all need to understand, these girls, really, I mean, it wasn't entirely surprising to me, because they're also part of the culture.
Yes.
So it's not, I don't expect certain stereotypes, approaches, biases, behaviors to end just because you're in a certain profession. But no, I'm going to go back to UB.
Yeah.
And about that, having the potential to lead a human rights movement. I think UB itself suffers from political interference.
Okay. Yeah, you're
That's
right.
not even, that's not even a question. It
Yeah.
still does. I mean, it's in its charter. So human rights also hasn't been institutionalized in a meaningful way. In its strategic documents, in the way it engages with students, it has not been.
I agree.
And so you have faculty members who model the very thing that human rights activists are pushing against.
I agree.
And so I think if you be, and it does have the potential to be that, I don't think it's there yet. I think what you're doing at the classroom level is good. It's essential. I think a lot more faculty members should be doing that visibly. We don't have, and this is a function of the history of Ruby, as a primarily teaching institution. So we don't have a lot of scholarship around human rights coming out. And also because of how UB structured, we don't have a lot of vocal activists coming from UB. So there's not a strong scholar, well, I'll say it's actually a scholar activist tradition at the University of the Bahamas. And where you see movements that exist, that requires courage, that requires interest in going against the status quo, that requires, and faculty members may not have the energy. Others are trying to supplement their UB experience with things that are actually very interesting to them. And so I think it has the potential. I think not at all. It can get there. I think the student body as well. I don't know how malleable or how engaged they are civically. And how committed to these issues they are just as a body. Even looking at student government, how active has student government been in this regard? And so I think there is an opportunity, there is a gap, but it's going to require addressing some of those things.
I agree with you. I think UB, and I said that up front, I think has potential. And I don't necessarily mean specifically lead the movement, to ground the discussion and to ground the research and set up the institution. Because my fear, I shouldn't say it like that, I think it may not, the best approach may not be to have it, to have the institution established by the government, by the government.
No, I agree.
Because then it becomes very politicized, and they set it up, and the PLP set it on the FNL, and there's an accent. I'm doing that because I was this government, and I didn't like him, or whatever the case may be. That's why I said, and that's not that. I'm really and truly not saying it against any government, any administration.
No,
I think the reality is it needs to be depoliticized. It needs to be in an institution like UB because it ought to be. I hear you that UB is to some extent politically influenced, but I think that if you're going to have any kind of a national institution, it has more chance of blooming on its own in a UP. But it requires, as you say, I think more than anything at this time, it requires thought about how to get that done. That's the first thing. And the second thing, it requires the courage to actually move it forward because there's a lot of opposition. I'm telling you, one of my challenges, I would love to see, for an example, human rights be a mandatory course. I think it ought to be for all social science majors, right? I think it ought to be for all the social science majors, but I don't know that everyone will agree with that. But there's something I have to say that we start by letting it become a mandatory course for my law students, which it is not. It's an elective, right? So, and so it will take time, and I think it will go way beyond my time at UB. But the ground, I think it's the most fertile ground for this to happen in. And the students, they will come. The challenge, and because what needs to happen with UB as well, and we know UB is supposed to be about Bahamians, but UB has become competitive. Right? So people may want to say, instead of going to University of Guyana or University of the West Indies, Barbados, I want to come to the Bahamas for the human rights program. They have a strong human rights program. That's what you want. But that takes time, right? It's not going to happen like this. And so you don't have, if you have to have the vision to do it and then start to want that vision. Right, because at the moment, I don't think it's a vision in anybody's mind. I tell you, I dusted off the human rights stuff last year, and we reintroduced the course and updated it a bit with it on to today. But so it will take some time. But ultimately, that's to me the best ground. I just don't know that it will be able to bloom. And of course, it's about leadership as well. You have to identify the right leaders. You have to identify the right leaders because if you put somebody in there who don't really truly believe in human rights, but they just, as Erin said, talk the human rights language, it ain't gonna go nowhere. Go on.
This is what's happening with the programs that it's not, so we're not necessarily prioritizing, I'm not a part of that community anymore. Merit isn't necessarily being prioritized. And we see that. And we see that. I'm not going to name the institutes. You have some incompetent, unqualified people heading up very important programs and institutions at the University of The Bahamas today. Yes. I'm not going to name them.
I don't know any.
And that wasn't what was envisioned when a particular institute, this is an example, was created. It was envisioned to have someone with the requisite background and not and not a mismatch. And I think
No name.
right. And then that was connected to national development in a very specific way.
That was a missed opportunity.
Everything else is great, but it's there and it's entrenched, and no one seems to know how to rectify it. Right. And so what I'm saying is, if you have a culture that's so messy, and these things are just, they seem to be baked in. Nothing is permanent, obviously, and it could be done with the right leaders in place. And I'm not saying that this wouldn't work with the right leadership, but who gets to make the decision about who leads?
That's the point. You're going to add something.
I was going to something about the institute that just shows that they don't have the capacity Rodney Smith from that moment that he was called out for plagiarism. And the person who appeared to have been chastised is the person who called out the plagiarism. He left the institution and he was brought back. Like, UB hasn't recovered. I don't think UB has recovered from that in terms of institutional integrity locally, right?
Yeah.
Like, they could do all they get this correct, but for the people, right, on the ground, like, and then, like a student said, like, how are you going to penalize me in plagiarism?
The faculty can prove it themselves. The student in its code of conduct can. I checked this out because one of the
We do have a plagiarism policy, and that is not allowed. Yeah. No, for students.
I know for students.
Well,
I looked this up for faculty because someone in one of the schools who is still there plagiarized an entire document that was being sold to students. And that practice was stopped. So, yeah. And they mandatory documents.
So they photocopied something and then put their name on it.
Right. Without crediting the previous sites and everything else. But again, there's a double standard in terms of expectations for faculty members and for students. Just streamline everything. And I know that there's an industrial agreement that governs faculty engagement with the university. So that's where that comes in, because the university
and we know that the university has a long way to go, and let me just in recent fans indicate that, it is a young university. We're still, 6 years old, I think, or 7, I don't know, not that old, no. So give it a minute, and it has to fall down a little bit on its wobbly legs and get some googly eyes in the room. But I'm not trying to excuse any kind of poor behavior. I think plagiarism should not happen no matter where. If you just start yesterday or you start the next week or you've been around for 10 years, plagiarism should not happen. Let me just state that unequivocally. But what I'm saying is that these kinds of issues happen the world over, and it cannot mean that the university itself should be thrown away. What we need to do is I hear you, but what we need to do is we need to identify those challenges when they come and respond to them in a way that is correct, right? And so we should correct the situation with plagiarism from the president right on down to the students. It should be addressed and corrected, right? And so I'm saying that is the case. But just to say that doesn't the inadequacies, if you will, of the organization as it currently stands, it has many faults or things that it's trying to outgrow or try to stabilize in its growth. That doesn't change my mind in any way in terms of thinking that UB is still the best ground for such an institution, a human rights institution, to be able to bring, and I sometimes I feel that you got to build it in the path, because
I think before we go any further with it, maybe we move away from whether it might be good or bad. We haven't said what the National Human Rights Institute is. Yeah. So for people who are joining us who have never heard of this, have no idea what is this, why do we need it?
you want to go? Take a shot.
No. She's talking about the national. Which are you talking about? The
International.
body in accordance with the Paris Principles? Or
Yeah.
You can take that.
So with the Paris Principles, they call for states to set up a National Human Rights Institute, which should be an independent body, which should have its own a statutory body that reports to the Parliament, so to speak. And so it's not necessarily under a minister that is going to be dictating what they should be doing. It shouldn't be a department of ministry XYZ. It should be a standalone entity with your own authority. You can take independent complaints from society, as in right now you can do your complaints about the police to the police, but you don't have another institution to go to. So the institution can take that kind of complaint as well. If you have complaints about the university, for example, if you feel that the principles or the policies or something in the university is incorrect, well, you can take that to the institute. So the institute looks at, and it's different from an ombuds, and I'm going to get to the ombuds later, but the institute is supposed to be looking at several different issues, right? So complaints from the public is one aspect of it. It should also be looking at how do we respond to the reports of the government of the Bahamas to the international community. So when the Bahamas writes a report to the Universal Periodic Review process of the Human Rights Council, and they say we are all lovely and rosy and there's no human rights, the institute also gets to write a report and say this is the reality. So they gather statistics and data, so they work closely with the statistical departments and so forth, and they can actually put a human rights report together. So the idea is they should put, at least in my view, at least every other year, a human rights report out on the status of human rights in the country. Can say that. It would be great if it's every year. It's difficult to maybe come up with it in any year, but every other year they should do that. Or maybe at the beginning, we want to say 3 years and then move on from there. So that's what we're reporting on the human rights status in the country as well. Then they're supposed to be teaching human rights, right? Teaching as an educating the public on what are rights, right? And in an instance like a referendum, breaking it down so the public can understand what this is about. So it's an educational tool as well, and it's an educational arm as well, and an awareness arm, so that they are saying, how do they, go on, I don't know, Erin Green's show or another show and say, what are human rights in the morning, and talk about that and discuss human rights. So they're supposed to be raising awareness across the country. They're supposed to be going to do that kind of research in every single settlement, in every single island where we have human beings living in violence, and discussing with those people and understanding what their human rights concerns are. And if we really want to go this way, doing thematic reports. So what is an issue that is thematically of concern for us in the Bahamas? Could be marital aid, right? It could be the rights of persons with disabilities. It could be the right to health, access to health, and the adequacy of the hospital, and what are the human rights violations that people are facing because of a lack of an adequate standard of health here in the country. So that's what the institution do, and it can do much more, but some institutions also have clinics, for example, so they can do advice to persons who, like a legal aid clinic, which they may want to do with, say, the Eugene Depute Law School or something like that, so that they can have student lawyers who can advise people on where they need to go to get their issues resolved in the country. And that's what the institute would be doing, right? So if you make that a department within the government, within any government, but any department, you limit it to the various levels you have to go through to get to things done, right? To go to inaugurate or assess the situation of human rights in Nauru, housing, living conditions. You have to go to 15 different people to get an agreement to go on the flight to Nauru to be assessed, right? So this is it. You have to have a certain level of independence, and your person has to be qualified to do this kind of work. You can't get your cousin to do it. And I mean, your cousin may be eminently qualified, so maybe yes. But the idea is your cousin is going to be, they have to be qualified, he or she needs to be qualified, right? To do this kind of work. Yeah. And if we really want to take it seriously and do it well. Yeah. So we don't go on national TV and say, we don't have any human rights concern, or race doesn't exist here, or we don't have any femicide in the country, right?
And no homophobia, no trans killing.
We don't have this in the country. So the reality is this is what the institute would do. But again, it would take a brave and bold government to agree to do that. Agree to say, okay, we're setting up this institution which ultimately is going to point out some deficiencies that we have. But you have to be a mature person to agree to that happened to you. And I know it's difficult. Yeah. It's difficult because what every politician, every man in the world wants to win the elections, right? And I understand that. I'm not, being naive. But I do believe that we need to have a cadre of politicians that understand this important political lives, that social justice, and it comes out really nicely in the National Development Plan, the challenges with social justice issues that we have in the country. We want to start there. There are many, there are this many, right? And so if we want to start there, we don't have to go very far to see where they are. Yeah. Right? And start talking about these issues. So that's what the National Human Rights Institution is. And I encourage you all to go online and Google it. It's a National Human Rights Institution according to the Paris Principles, and they outline what that is, right? And that differs from an ombuds. I know we talked about having an ombuds person in the government as well. And that person works in the government to look at complaints specifically with respect to the government, right? Administrative complaints, essentially. They do know administrative law, generally speaking. How it works in most places that I'm familiar with. They don't operate in the same way that that national human rights institutions do, although in some countries they give the ombuds a little bit more flexibility to do a little bit more in terms of awareness and report writing and research and human rights initiatives and so forth. So that's it. But I mean, I'd love to hear some comments from you or whether any of you whether you think it's the way to go. But I think that is missing. And I'm not going to get back to newbies age, but I do think that is missing in the country, and I think it's an important step for us to take, and for us to also. And another thing I think the National Human Rights Institution could do, is look at all the hundreds of recommendations that have come through to us already, and try to see how we can categorize those and see which ones we want to implement. Exactly. To stagnate and to say these recommendations have been coming through consistently. Perhaps we need to look at this, and then you make your own recommendation. Go ahead, sorry.
I mean, the ombudsman bill now, they did put a lot of human rights language, not human rights language. They put the term human rights in that document, and so I don't know.
I haven't read it.
Oh, okay. All right.
That's why I'm kind of because of that, but I haven't read it, so
so they do have that dimension in it, because the first one really was about maladministration.
Most places it is about.
That's what it's about. But one of the things they decided to do was, okay, we can just upgrade this a little bit, and also at the same time they should be a parliamentary on human rights. Yeah, they also advanced this. They made sure that human rights, the term human rights, was in there. I think they didn't say something about violations. I have to read it again. This is also.
But I think the Bahamas has. I don't want to say done well, but I want to say that they have, in comparison to many other countries, done well in terms of responding to some human rights issues, right, and trying to implement some sort of human rights initiatives, right? Now, these may be all, dressed and blah, yeah. But it's a step in the right direction. And so now we need to, it's again for civil society and the human rights movement to push a little bit harder for them on this. And I know it's difficult, but just to say that, I think we really gone far in pushing on these issues in the Human Rights Council. I can say that. We have raised on several occasions issues which other Caribbean countries have not necessarily raised in the human rights space, and many countries do see the Bahamas as a human rights lead for the Caribbean. Now, whether we think that's a fair thing to say, we know because we're here looking at it. But we know, I will say that I think there has been some work, and to deny that is to truly not be fair to them. I can say, as a person who represents the Bahamas and CARICOM on the United Nations Permanent Forum on People of African Descent, to have that kind of space allowed by the government really is awesome. And I have not had any muzzle or anything placed on me yet. And, I speak as a human rights, an independent human rights expert. And there are others. Marian Bethel has been an expert, and she's still with the Inter-American System as an expert. So we are now encouraging that. I want to see more people get that kind of exposure. We spoke about Naomi Hall Campbell-Dean, who's doing a lot, and she is our reparations committee head here in Bahamas, but the kind of way she's engaging on reparations issues globally is phenomenal, and I think that's very impressive. And so, but she's being allowed to do that and supported, and in many cases funded by the government to do that, right? So those things ought to be commended. I don't want to leave from here thinking that we're just bashing, government bashing.
Taking, I guess, wanting to sort of acknowledge whatever steps have been taken. I have a serious problem with implementation. Yeah, and with like sidestepping and working around. I don't like it. I'm like, no, I don't want to
agree with you.
I
agree with you.
And this has been done so much with the government of the Bahamas in the last few years. One instant brought up already at Universal Periodic Review. I went to Geneva, advocated for certain recommendations. And the responses of the government to the recommendations are like, is this kindergarten? You know, so one of the recommendations was to name and count the sex and gender-based killing of women and girls as femicide. And the response was, we have no recorded incidents of femicide. Which, why would you, if you don't acknowledge it? You don't use that term. So of course you don't.
That's why they say we have no marital rate.
That's the response, right? They went knowing that in the previous cycle, 2018, I think, it was recommended that there be a national human rights institution that needs to be implemented. Knowing that, and that question was going to come up again in 2023. The state said, oh, just formed the parliamentary.
They did it at the same time.
The parliamentary committee, but this is what they spoke to. They didn't say to that.
Yeah.
We just want a parliamentary committee on human rights, which is not the same as the National Human Rights Institute.
Of course.
At all, because these are a bunch of parliamentarians.
Yeah.
That's not what it's supposed to be. It's not independent at all.
Yeah.
And but they do these things and they expect some kind of praise, and I think it's on us to call it out.
Yes, it is on us to call it.
It is on us to do it.
They were expected to be there, first of all, in Europe.
No, I'm not saying
Yes,
that.
they were expected to be there. And it's like, why is she trying to upset the apple cart? You know, the reality is more people likely should be there holding their feet to the fire and publishing and saying this is what the reality of the country is. And that's why we, you know, and so I know, I'm not trying to say that I'm supporting whatever they're doing in terms of trying to dodge questions. I've been working with these human rights mechanisms so long. Every country does it. And I don't expect any different from the Bahamas government. That's what they do, right? They're trying to look good internationally. It's not something that I'm saying we should be proud of, but I'm saying that where there has been some incremental change, we know it's not been enough, but we have to recognize that step in the right direction. By saying, yes, this is good, but what about? And you start to see it. And that has to happen consistently. And the more you push, that's why I feel like the challenge is to be a lower voice, which I know is heavy. And that's why I think it's important we talk about the critical mass and talk about making movement. And when you have that, you begin to see some sort of change. Sorry, I interrupted you. No.
Also, I did ask you about the movement too, because you mentioned movement a couple of times, and I'm wondering, has there ever been a movement, or have we just had a series of moments?
A series of moments. The closest thing to a movement in any real time would have been the women suffrage movement, and that was the 50s, 60s, before I wasn't born, you know? But you know, I mean, no movement has been there have been issues. Gender-based violence has a lot of momentum around it, but I don't know if I'll call it a movement because it is not a consistent movement.
But it's not a movement for a couple of reasons. There is movement.
That's one.
Wallace is the movement. There is movement.
All right.
No. Wallace is the movement. There are too many people in the damn river pushing in the opposite direction against actors who they're supposed to be doing the same thing as.
Yeah.
That's a part of the reason why we can't get critical mass. While we're talking about that, I have to say out loud, Ms. Wallace, don't forget to add the time where you were adding critical interrogation to while you were sitting in on other country sessions and giving recommendations to the Bahamas government, and one office just decided to block her from their social media platforms.
Oh, yeah?
No, one government office working with the UN decided to block her. I just wanted to put that on the record to emphasize right?
And that's I mean, the human rights defenders, you know, this is a global cry about human rights defenders, right? And the persons that are challenging their motions, their own governments, right? It's their governments. Nobody's back of them about.
I stopped getting calls for meetings and events and activities for human rights activists. I want to know outside of Wallace, right? Who's human rights acting in this town? Who's talking about it consistently with the people they invite to forums? I just, like, you know, they may be doing some work, they may have written a paper, but there has to be a degree of exposure and public advocacy.
I agree with
To be
you.
called to these spaces,
I agree
right?
with you. I haven't been called to many. I would say that even as an expert,
I want to make a point though
We
that
don't want experts.
no, that's it. They don't want experts, right? And that's the problem. The problem with incrementalism is that it has become a strategy
Yeah.
to prevent the work.
So,
Yeah,
let's show them a little, like something every now and again. No, and I mean, nobody likes that, but the other thing, what can we do to change it? That's part of
Okay, so let me tell you, hold on, let me tell you right now. We don't respond appropriately to incrementalism because we don't have the wherewithal, or we feel that we don't have the resources to do the work without the government. That's right, Wallace is doing the work without the government. Wallace has been able to identify resources, agencies, and individuals locally and globally, right, to support her network. So the first things first, any sustainable human rights organization needs an income generating mechanism. That's why I like my friend Wallace. Wallace said the income generating mechanism is deeply tied to the ethos of work that she's doing. I've been telling these gay people for decades, you need an income generating mechanism. And if you're gonna have a club, the club has to be for purpose. And you have to police it like a community space, right? So it means you have to cut people off, even though they are your best spender. You have to cut them off because you know how they get after 4 drinks.
So, but to Gaynel's point about what do we do, I think everyone's doing it in their spaces and within our respective limitations. I think people are doing it. I think at this stage, and you know, we collaborate as much as we want with whomever we want, but I don't know, and that is something that is healthy. And I think it also ultimately elevates the conversation to a certain point. Alicia, you spoke about this year around menstrual products, et cetera. That was elevated from just one interaction. And there was a national discussion about it because someone just wanted to raise that as an issue and they chose to publish that. So being in certain spaces, being in community spaces, I know Lucia definitely makes an effort to facilitate those spaces and bringing folks in there. I think, again, recognizing the demographic that or the constituencies that we engage with. Right now, not bringing my organization. We're working with young people. And it's interesting to me, and Lucia was mentioning this to you on Friday, that one of the things that there are young people who are interested, and that's encouraging. It is encouraging. They're interested today. And who knows what society is going to tell them, or who those loudest voices are going to be. Alicia has an internal voice that drives her.
Yes.
And oftentimes, the external voices drown out whatever impulse folks have. But it's not to prevent the conversations from happening. There is a lot of value in one-on-one conversations. I mean, I've had conversations just with random agents who know nothing about this, and then they just start to see things in a different way. So there's a lot of added value there. But I think that's what we can continue doing what we do and think of ways to scale it up.
I think that's going to be really very important. How do we scale it up? These type of opportunities to discuss issues, I think is really very, very important. I have to say that my focus has been more external than internal. I've not done a lot of work internally for a very, very long time. And yeah, I'll leave that there. But just to say that, you know, a lot of my external engagements are influenced by the realities of this country, right? And I need to find a way to bring that external back into the local, outside of my classroom. I do that in my classroom, and that's why I love my classroom. That's my little space. I feel like I can't do that anywhere else, right? Because if I do that anywhere else, we've been on calls where I've been shouted down and called all sorts of names for daring to speak about human rights. And daring to say that all human beings in the Bahamas should have their human rights and their rights should be protected, respected, and enjoyed.
Yeah.
And so, you know, from all sorts of, and I, you know, so just to say that I have to find a way to do that a little bit better at the community level. And I think we have to know where our strengths are too. I think my strength is really engaging globally and trying to bring the local to the global and having those kinds of conversations. But I really do need to, and I do that, as I said in my class, but I need to think more strategically outside of that as to how I can make that happen.
You don't need to do that. Use one thing. I mean, after what you've experienced in this landscape, that's all I'm going to say. You do whatever you feel suited to do, and you fill the gap, right? Like and that's a part of it. A part of it, we're not gaining critical mass as quickly as we can because we're not tending to the wounded, right? We're not recognizing the fullness of the work that has to be done.
Yeah.
And then we're not stepping in and doing it, right? And so I don't have much money to give Wallace, right? To give Equality Bahamas, but how I can help Wallace, I try to help Wallace, right? Like,
Yeah.
we've stopped that part of the work. And that's something I find very interesting, the difference between kind of organizing here and my tangential experience with organizing in the rest of the region. There is more community, there's more personal integrity, there's more empathy.
Yeah.
Here we are able to render people invisible and pretend like, right? And so it's hard to maintain mass, let alone gain it,
Yeah.
when we're not doing the work internally in terms of our organizations and personally that we're kind of demanding that other people take on.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of it. We're losing people because they're wounded and they're hurt.
Yeah.
And then they have to turn and focus on their economic survival,
Yes.
right? And
That's the reality.
and
That's
then-
exactly the reality.
That's why you gotta be for,
Exactly.
I mean, that's why you have to be stupid like me and not think about things like the future, right? And life after retirement. Don't get a job. And you ain't never have to retire. You gotta have strategies. But that's where we're driving advocates, right? Like,
No, I agree. This is why I said, I mean, everyone's doing what they can.
The space within.
Yeah, exactly.
we
And
need
that
to organize. And so
I agree.
people aren't wasting. But here's the thing. My friend here worked for government. So I learned to measure, like in public discourse, on the radio, whether you're there or not, I get to measure how I'm going to approach it. I had Keisha Ellis on yesterday. She's supposed to be there for 15 minutes. That's what they booked, right? It was booked for them. But I can't go into the politics and the rah and leave some people with a bad feeling,
You know.
and hands for hunger in there, right? So you civil servants, and let them know, look, if you're sent here to do a job, I'm not going to let people abuse you. Like, you're the third vice secretary. What do you know? What do you know? Right? And so there's the professional integrity, the empathy, and then strength to not let the desperation and frustration turn you into the thing that you're trying to fight, right? Not sharing opportunities, not talking about funding opportunities, keeping things hawkish, right? And it's just like, for people who are doing the work from a personal place, it becomes overwhelming, the rage that you can feel.
Yes.
You can just like get out of this space, man. Like you're not even understanding who you're supposed to be in this space.
Appreciate to be quiet here, but that's it. And you do ask yourself, sometimes you're rendered invisible and sometimes you feel it's good that you're invisible. Because you can get on with your business and get on with what it is you need to do without being in anybody's limelight. And so I don't necessarily push to being in the limelight at all. As a matter of fact, and what's going on here in the country, I keep a very, very low profile, and I really do like it. There are others who can do it here and who are doing a good job. See, some things change. And I do believe that culture of rights that I wrote about, I don't know, 100 years ago, I don't remember when it was, 2013, I wrote an article on the building a culture of rights in the Bahamas, and I talked about that, multi-tiered approach, and it's not just about engaging with the international treaties and conventions, but it's about building our institutions to be human rights focused, ready, and appropriate. Really, I had the very good fortune to be there for the birth of two countries, particularly East Timor, Timor-Leste, as they call themselves these days. And that's one of the things I went there to do, was to help them ratify the international human rights treaties and to set up their human rights national mechanism. And that was awesome. Yes. And that was challenging. Yes. Yeah. Because the persons who pushed back most were generally my UN colleagues, right? Why do you want to let this tiny new country ratify all these treaties? It's too much. Just let them do one. And I got a lot of pushback, so I just made an appointment to see the Secretary General Representative, Sergio Gamela, rest his soul, God. That is my boss who got grown up in Iran. But anyway, he was there at the time, and he said, "Oh, Ms. Curry, it's too much." I said, "Sir, let's have a proper conversation here. Which rights or who in East Timor you want to wait for their right? Should we ask children to wait? You want women to wait? We want the people who were tortured under the previous regime to wait. Who do we want to wait? And then how do we tell them that? No rights for you right now. Right? So, and that was the question. And with that discussion, he walked over there saying, "Yes, well, go ahead and do what you need to do." We needed to ratify all, because you don't get a chance often. Many people will never see the birth of a country, in a sense that you get to input at the very onset, at the establishment of the Constitution, the writing of their legislation, the setup of their institution. And at the onset, you must ensure that those countries introduce human rights right then, that you encourage them to set up a national human rights institution, that they could lead human rights training, that they have a strong human rights department in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and in other parts of the country that are looking at it locally, right? And so that was something that was really, really moving for me and touching for me, that they were ready to do that and allowed me to do that on behalf of the UN with them. And they ratified them. And the question was always too much. Yes, that's where we come in as the UN. We must give them the technical assistance and support that they need to write these reports and they don't know how to do it. Right? And so at the end of the day, that doesn't exist. We are a strong, established country. We over 50 years old, we get old, right? So now to break in with human rights is a challenge. I believe, personally, that the time we should have introduced equality between men and women in the Constitution at the time of independence. Why would we have a Constitution where we don't give rights, equal rights to all women? And so that should have happened in 1973, or when they were negotiating before what they wanted to be in the Constitution, right? So now for us to say, let's get it in the Constitution, we've been so used to not having it there, to introduce it seems like, why do you want to introduce this for a day? It is something that we should have always had, and that was that we should have had equally with men from the onset of from the birth of this country. To now try to introduce it, people are saying no, for various reasons. So that's a challenge. You don't have a chance to do it anymore here. So how can we be creative in trying? It's kind of like trying to maneuver something that's already set. It's already set. And so the people are already set in their ways of thinking. And many people do that. Gaynel Curry is talking about human rights again, and at least 4 or 9 years she's been living in Europe too long. I'm talking about the human rights that actually the women's suffrage movement leaders marched for. When I see their signs, it wasn't only about voting, it was about peace, it was freedom, it was bread. They have all these things on the side. Those are human rights. So they should have got that when they got right for. I'll let them.
All right.
And I mean, I'm not disagree, please.
No. I have a second question for you. So recently, I discovered Article 73(1)(a) of the Bahamian Constitution that says that if the Governor General has to appoint someone as Prime Minister, he must appoint the leader of the party that commands the support of the most seats of MPs in the House, as opposed to the MP in the House that commands the support of the majority of MPs, right? It's a deliberate and intentional distinction from other Commonwealth constitutional models. I think from that has emanated a political culture that believes, through its interpretation of that clause, it believes that they own the country. They own the right to make decisions on our behalf. They own the right to make decisions about the allocation of national resources, right? Like they own governance and they own the government. In your experience, have you seen a constitutional provision similar to that? In your experience, have you heard historically, have you heard any conversations locally, whether formal or informal conversations with people interrogating that provision in the Constitution? Because I think that maybe not in theory, maybe not in nature, but definitely in effect, it has resulted in a political culture that cannot tolerate a human rights construct. Like, what rights you have? Forget, like, you only have the rights that God gave you. Like, those are the only rights they're willing to recognize. But what rights you have? So, maybe voters can make these decisions for you. Have you engaged in or heard any conversations interrogating that provision and its impact on governments and politics in the country?
I've heard, but I've not been in those discussions at all. I think they discussed it at the forum that.
Future of democracy?
Yeah, future democracy.
I mentioned it. I know Sean
mentioned
referenced it. I think and 2 other speakers made reference to it.
Yeah, and so I think that the Constitution wasn't intended to be a stone and can't be moved, right? And I think that people introduced what they thought was right for the country or themselves at that time. But they also left a window for us to be able to change it, right? Because we are evolving, the country's evolving, we're growing as a people. We ought to be able to change it. The question more for me is why, because they've had constitutional reform commissions, et cetera, lots of recommendations, but no will to change. And the people, us, we have voted to not change anything, right? So we're not really ready to change anything. So the question is more about why do we have this view, this entrenched view that we cannot change anything about the Constitution? Why are we so stuck to this is what our forefathers wanted, and so it has to be like this for life? There is a possibility to change it, and it was intended for it to be changed. It is, right? And so we now have to question, what do we need to do to change our own thinking? Because we just tried several times in my lifetime to change it. And it was like, no, we're not changing anything. Go ahead.
There's a neurological psychological aspect to that where our brain is wired for safety. And so when safety is not what we think safety is, safety is whatever we tell our brain safety is. And so whatever becomes comfort, when you're trying to get anything to come outside of that comfort zone, you're now creating a lot of psychological distress in your brain. Yeah. And so if I have to fight against something that has been the same the whole time, now I'm inviting in overwhelm, burnout, stress, anxiety, like all of these psychological distress signals that just stop me from wanting to change, right? Because just like, I don't like this. Our body naturally does not like outside of the comfort zone. It fights against it. And so we fight against that discomfort and create a brand new way of what comfort is like. And so I think, and this goes back to my question, because it's like, my attitude is comfortable. Whatever you're saying, right? Because that would mean that I now need to fix whatever's going on with me, whatever makes me feel comfortable, to then make me like say that you're right. Right? And that my brain already can't even do that comfortably. Like my brain is literally wired to not do.
Yeah. Here's the thing about the referendum, the most recent failed one. It didn't fail by 100%. Yeah. And there were varying levels of disagreement for each of those proposals. Yeah. And so the first question actually had a much higher degree of individuals who voted yes for the change. So I'm not convinced that, folks are unwilling to change the Constitution. I think it's how I don't even know if it has presented to them, but that's what I was going to say. That could be an element of it. There are a lot of dimensions and a lot of factors that come into play, but that is also encouraging to see that there is a percentage of the population who is willing to entertain the idea of change.
And that's a positive thing. I think that's a very positive thing. And perhaps the next time we will have the numbers that we need to actually win.
Yeah, run it again. And see.
Yeah, run it again.
Y'all just, this next time, don't attempt to use trans people, intersex people, and gender non-conforming people in your agenda. Because I took umbrage just now when you said the failed referendum for intersex, trans, and gender non-conforming people. That was a successful outcome, because the result would have been pushing that constituency back 100 to 1,000 steps to take 2 or 3 steps forward for men and women, right? So, I appreciate, I know how you framed it and why you framed it. But from my position, we accept that failure as a win. It's unfortunate that the wishes to gain was set out in that way, right? It's very unfortunate, but we accept that.
Yeah. So the point was that people are open to change. There's a percentage of the population, I think, that's open to changing the Constitution.
And we hope for change in the future, but so far that's not happened.
It hasn't happened.
There was 10 years between the two, right? And so maybe we're getting close to maybe another 10 years, we'll be ready again.
Run it again.
And then there's something to come back. What?
Run it again.
Exactly.
Education, awareness, whatever we need to be flooding, the society with this issue. But I agree with you too, Lokel, because that's what I was talking about in East Timor. The fact that I had almost a blind slate and a willingness that people were willing to say, yeah, let's just improve this thing. So maybe because the most difficult thing to bring in is human rights of people in 10 years down the road, and they're used to doing whatever they do with the people. The accent changes for everyone. Yeah. And so this is a challenge. So my point with Erin's point, with Erin's issue is, had we dealt with equality between men and women in 1973, our debate today would be LGBTQI. And that's the full intent, that would be the full brunt of the push today. I think so.
No, it wouldn't have been.
You don't think so? Because
but it's a technical
we have-
legal point. No, it's a
Yeah,
technical
I hear
legal
you,
point.
but right now, what they're doing is they're trying to always use these things to fight with
Yeah,
one another.
But the point is to create constitutional equality between men and women, you have to entrench the principle of non-discrimination on the basis of sex.
Exactly.
If we did it the way that you got to do it, right, in the building of the new country, we would have had those difficult conversations 50
In
years ago.
1973.
Because the mechanism that creates that equality or liberates women is the same mechanism that liberates.
I agree.
Yes.
That's why I'm saying that to me, if that had been done then, the discussion around LGBTQI issues would be so much easier today, in my
It would be
opinion.
bound up in.
Exactly.
And why
It
limit,
will be pitted against each other all the time.
why limit the fullness of citizenship and
Yes.
humanity defined when you don't have to?
Yeah, exactly. So my question, right, for back then is why didn't we push it then? You know, why did we have a women's suffrage movement who went this far and is okay, not that, no further. Let me just get the right to vote, that's it. Right? So all those banners of red and freedom and all that stuff that you had marching, you weren't really, you didn't go far enough. That's not to discredit what they did. I think they did well. They got us the right to vote, fantastic. But I wish that the movement had continued and moved further toward the full rights for women and women in this country on equal footing. It shouldn't be now, here we are, almost 60 years later, trying to see how we can fight for these rights. And also saying, oh, I'm not giving it to you because you're talking about gay rights. It's not, and it's almost intentionally pitting, these two against each other, and denying people their rights. I believe that human rights should be for all human beings.
Yeah.
It's challenging to change the mindset. That's the nature of human rights and nature of the issues that cause people to think about rights in a certain way. For example, religion, it's very deep and meaningful to people. And so you're questioning everything they believe in, right? So the Bible says this, and I believe this, and you're causing me to question it. And this is why there's such a almost violent sometimes pushback. Somebody said to me that the thing that I shared there for a couple of maybe a year or two ago, well, I was attacked and told off for pushing there to put equality in the country. And someone said to me they were on that call and they admired the fact that I was so calm. Because I don't take it personally. I don't see it as a personal attack. Like, even though you're calling me names, I'm not going home and stressing about that. It's a personal thing about me.
Yeah.
It said, what that said to me, and I said it also to the young gentleman who was in the room with me on the project, who was from another Caribbean country. He's very upset. I said, not to be upset. This is so good because we get to see clearly and sweating, here we are. And how much work needs to be done. So when you can't think of you can't counter my argument with an intelligent counter argument, you now attack me and start calling me names, right? And so that. Unfortunately, that is where we're at. And it's people's personal beliefs. It's tied to their religion, their upbringing, their way of thinking, their way of life. And you're saying to them, question it. Question it. You grow up thinking that Haitians in the country are lesser human beings or whatever. Now, for you to say that they are human beings on equal footing with every other human being. It's like, oh, but then that's not what I was taught, or somehow that's against what I believe. Now, that makes me, as a Bahamian, lesser, because I'm saying you're on par with me, but they are human beings, like everybody else, human beings. And we talk about human rights, right? So if we continue to think about sort of how do we reclaim it, it's not going to be one single thing. It's going to be multiple issues. It's going to be, it's going to take what you have, which is just calm, to be able to continue to work with the forge forward, even despite whatever attacks that are coming in. I'm swimming upstream with all the things in the river backing against you. You're still swimming and trying to make it happen. It's going to take that But I think it's going to take, and I think Anissa said it, each of us in our various spaces to continue to do these things and to continue questioning. So we get it came. Because we need young people questioning these things and asking, why and why can't we do it differently? That's why I like the students so much. They, like everywhere else, the students push back on you and then you got to fight and put in work and get it in on time. But ultimately, it's a pleasure to teach them and to see how their minds can actually shift with the introduction of different information.
I was thinking about what you said rolling around my head with this idea of external voices. And then what you said about something you said earlier, but also in my recent comment about safety and the way that people sort of bar safety is very often religion, right? And for us, it's like the most fundamentalist form possible, and that's what we're coming against.
Yes.
A lot.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
struggling to respond to it. Because that's where we are, right? Like we're on the defense. We're not on the offense at all. Because faith leaders, misleaders, faith-based organizations have a captive audience, and they are engaging with them far more regularly than we are engaging with our constituents.
We've been engaging in them from they were in the cradle.
Yeah. And how do you confront people? That's what it is. It's a confrontation. How do you confront people of faith with the truth of the fundamentalism that they have bought into?
So
Without it being an attack on their safety.
yeah, it has to be
That's the question.
subversive, right?
Yeah.
It has to be subversive. I don't want to use the word over there because then you say, "What you talking about?" But it has to be subversive. You have to be savvy. You have to be clever. But it's easy. It's easy in the sense that if you really practice in empathy, right? Like if you come into it with a clean heart,
Yeah.
then you'll be frustrated that you'll sit in it and you'll figure out how to engage people. And the worst that'll happen is that you may feel a little bad for like tricking them to a place where they can see something more clearly. But that's how you got to walk like with people and say, "Come on now. I know you don't know this, but let's go." And not that language, but that's the energy you got to bring to it. And show them that you always believe this, right? Like, and so that's my intention on the radio is to, like, I always feel a way when people are talking about things that I first introduced and they don't reference that I introduced it or they heard it from me. But at the same time, that's the work. No, that's the work. The work is for people to believe that they always do this. They always thought, because you're telling people.
This is the idea, yeah.
You're telling people.
Like you would for
We engage everyone with compassion and empathy, even the queer people. They know that. They knew that. But you just have to bring them to the place where they say, "Oh man, I always knew that." But if you try to bring them to a place to say, "Wow, you don't remember what Aaron Green said?" They ain't gonna never acknowledge that. Even if Aaron Green say you're on fire and you need to be extinguished, they'll never acknowledge that they're on fire. So use Obel.
I find that
You know if I will go over there.
so the other version of that would be systems of safety.
Yeah.
Right. So it is a matter of systemic change. And I agree with you on about schools, right? Because I'm just talking about like teaching at CBI, psychology, when people come in, they don't believe in psychology. When they believe. Not only do they believe it, they practice it and they look at other people and see what else going on.
Yeah.
But I find that honestly, the young people, the work that is required, I usually say that you have construction workers and you have office workers. Construction workers are the people that build, right? Because the young people, especially in my experience in talking to them and like moving with
I believe they will be different.
Correct.
I believe
so
so.
we don't care what you look, say, we don't give a crap, you're a human being, this is what it is. That seems to be the MO of a lot of young people in high school right now, right? They're not getting brainwashed, air quotes. I don't believe in it being brainwashed, but I think too many young people are not feeling motivated, and the external voices is a huge thing. Right? I was told not to come home. I was like, that don't make sense. And I'm further here at home than I ever would have been in someone else's country. So I'm like, why would I not? Right? And in coming home now, it's, oh my God, we're so proud of you. No, but you was the one who told me not to come home. Right? And so, how as a young person, when my foundation, my familial foundation, is also giving me the language and the knowledge and the fight back to stay, right? You know, I always tell people, it's like, you got to send the farmers off, learn the knowledge, and let them come back and work farm. And that's the only way that you can harvest time, because you give people something to come back for, and the fight. But I'm noticing the fight isn't as strong as like how you have this fight, right? And it's like I look around. So the questioning of why is just one part. The fight versus the next. The passion is missing in such grandiose ways that we need it. It's there, but it needs to be hotter.
And I think that we need to recognize the reality in which we live. When we think about suffrage movement, what else are we doing? What else would we do? There's no television, there's no iPad, there's no internet, there's no phone, there's no. Seriously, all those things are competing for our attention and our thing, right? But so engagement is different. It's very much different. They talk about age.
On board.
But they could go with each other's doors. Yes, they could go their door to door. But
Yes.
yeah,
So you use social media together.
exactly. So to go and to go to social media, it's, I mean, how are you engaging that, right? So you can do that for some percentage of the population and engage them, others you can't, right? So this is big divide. Somebody mentioned to me the other day that we have in a workplace 3 generations of people.
Yes. Yes.
Right? So you have to engage and speak to them. You know, speak to them differently, engage them differently, understand them differently, they approach the work differently. And this is how we have to recognize also the movement. If we are talking about the sort of a movement, it almost has to be triple tiered, right?
Yeah.
And so because you're not going to reach everybody the same way. But you know, in my old age, I still have a vote and I still have an opinion and a thought. But that may be very different from my 18-year-old nieces and nephews, right? So, so
Like, how old now?
no, and I have several in the teens. And so, you know, I think that, so we have to think about how are we engaging the realities in which we live. How can we ensure that we target the right people the way we want to target them? This cannot be, it really needs thinking. That's really the bottom line.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? And it's a multi-layered approach. There's no one answer to
I think-
changing that.
I think it's multi-layered, multimodal, and multidisciplinary.
Yeah.
Because I fall under human rights, right? Mental health falls under human rights, but never in our realm do we ever use the word human rights, right? And so the multidisciplinary aspect of it is everything that falls under the umbrella must also use the language. Yeah. Because I'm like, never really thought about it like that. Maybe I could figure out a way to present mental health as a active right of human rights, right? Because the fact that we
I mean, we don't see it as that.
no regulation, the legislation just reached in 2022 for mental health. Like, what are we talking about? There's people brain.
Yeah.
You know, before they even human, they're alive with a brain, and you don't even have no rights, right? So it's like, all right, that's fine. But multi-layered, and what you call multi-tiered, multimodal, because where are the signage? Where are the commercials? Where are the books, the papers? Right, you're going to school. Where the even a sticker that I put on my phone, it has to be something that people cannot ignore because they're seeing it everywhere, so they can't forget it. Just things on memory. Our memories are garbage, right? And so it's like, how do I remember what you said in that forum 2 years ago, unless it was like monumental? If it's not being seen, if it's not being shared, and it's not being repeated in multiple disciplines. It's like,
But memory has always been a part of the resistance and a part of the revolution because, you know, you can't fight a revolution if it's not because of what you remember happened to your ancestors. And that's when you think about places like the Asian Revolution or even here, our revolutions, right? Our revolutionary moments, if you will. It was from the memory that, hey, we can't get a seat in the parliament, or hey, we can't own land, or hey, we can't vote, or hey, we can't work in the bank, or hey, you only have 5 schools on this island, right? So the memory of what that meant for us, because of those lack of opportunities, was like close to the memory of going back to Plainfield or to whatever field you come from, picking whatever you picked about or whatever he's doing. So the reality is the memory has been the driving force for resistance and for revolution, and somehow the memory is not as vividly shared today as it ought to be. If we look, for example, we go back to the educational system. History is one of those things I talk about, and we talk about the fact that in many of my political science course, when I introduce certain things, they did civics, I think, in grade 7 or 8, and then they haven't done history. History, of course, all the way up to 12th grade, they haven't done it. And they because it's an elective, it's not a mandatory course, but it ought to be mandatory up until a certain thing. And so if you talk about what are we teaching, what are we encouraging our young people to remember, I don't know, were you in that the Pan-African discussion the other day? At UB, there was a discussion about Marcus Garvey and Pan-Africanism. I don't know, Erin, you were there? But in any case,
I know about it.
that was so, yeah.
Robert Love, Marcus.
Yes,
Garvey.
yes. So this is that discussion when one of the speakers out of Jamaica, Stephen Golding, mentioned this issue about decolonizing our educational system or decolonizing education. Even the nursery rhymes we teach our children are very racist and sexist and all those kinds of things. So, and we still use them today. And sometimes, as he put it, his grandma got old and that's only thing she remembered. A friend of mine the other day, luckily she remembered Bob Marley song. She had a problem with her memory. The only thing she could sing was One Love, right? Bob Marley. She couldn't remember anything else, not even her children's name. So the end of the day is what goes into our brains at a very early age. What are we doing to ensure that we colonize, that we teach children what we want them to do, that we introduce human language, that they are familiar with the memory, which is their history. And that memory ought to be a part of their everyday life. Remember when we were.
Yeah.
So,
You're talking about sustaining a revolutionary spirit.
yes.
But we're teaching obedience and compliance. That's what we're teaching.
Follow the system. That's
And that's the point. The revolutionary spirit is what I think is missing. Precisely, because it's deliberately, and that's what I'm saying. It is important. It's we have to be teaching compliance from our churches to our schools to every social club. Where you mentioned some of the other ones earlier, Karen, who are very much about compliance. We speak the same language, do the same things, but I'm saying they're not teaching the memory because the memory is what is the revolution. And so I am teaching them. I want people to be revolutionary in their thinking and to break out of this sort of zombie being of saying this and thinking and to question, the nursery rhymes that they're telling their children, or to question what we're teaching our children, and to question why am I not learning? Why didn't I learn about the Haitian Revolution when I was a history major, right? Or why didn't I learn about the great civilizations of Africa, even though I was a history major here? Why did I learn all about the kings and queens of England? And that's the pacifism that you speak about. They want us to be pacific. They want us to follow certain line. I don't know why or where the revolution in me sprung up, but it did.
good thing.
But you're right. That's the conflict right there. That's the conflict right there. And so we encourage you to keep the revolutionary spirit.
Yes.
Everyone.
Unless you're on a border control, customs, or immigration line, and then you just tell that revolutionary spirit right back into your carry-on. No, and then when you get where you're going, nope. Before they have to come in and fly and
Thank you, Gaynel, for being here with us and having this conversation about reclaiming culture and human rights. You've taken us in so many different places. I think it's going to be really interesting to watch the recording and see what we talked about.
I don't know how many people we have on the line, but it was an interesting conversation.
Yeah. So this was our last event of the Global 16 Days Campaign 2025. We are taking our work forward into 2026, of course. We will be back in January with Women's Wednesdays and with the Feminist Standards for Governance. Back with our workshops to develop a people's agenda. We know that 2026 general election is coming. We know we're not interested in the winning term of governments. We're not interested in the winning manifesto. We're doing our own thing. Feminist Standards for Governance. We will update on December 16th our Luma page with the workshops for early next year. So check out tiny.cc/feminist standards to do all that. Sign up to the Equality Bahamas newsletter to stay in the know. Equality-Bahamas.kit.com. Equality-Bahamas.kit.com. Follow us on Instagram at Equality242. And please boost the signal on our social media posts, particularly on Facebook and Instagram. Facebook especially, we are being shadow banned right now. We're not getting any reach on our posts. And I have been banned from boosting posts and doing ads. We won't even let me give them a link to get our posts to see the light of day. So please like, comment, and share to try and teach the algorithm that's what we want to see. Enjoy the rest of your morning. Yeah, it's bedtime. Good night.
Thank you.